This episode is brought to you by Netflix's Remarkably Bright Creatures. What if a Pacific octopus held the key to a mystery that could heal your heart? Well, that's Tova's reality. An elderly widow working at an aquarium, Tova forms an unlikely friendship with the curmudgeonly Marcellus, whose remarkable intelligence leads her to a life-changing discovery. Remarkably Bright Creatures is now playing, only on Netflix.
Not in our names. We refuse to allow Jews to be a moral cover for genocide and apartheid and for the U.S.'s own financial and imperial interests that drive our support of Israel. You know, we refuse to have Jews be used in that way, and we will do everything we can. Not only refuse that, but to actually deliver the material change needed to see a very different world.
That's Stefanie Fox, the CEO of Jewish Voice for Peace, a massive grassroots organization in the United States that's been really at the forefront of the public protests and the student protests against the genocide in Gaza, and more recently on the question of the US and Israeli war on Iran, which is illegal. I'm Sanam Andelini.
And I'm Kavita Nandini Ramdas.
Apologies for my sound. I am on a phone at the moment, so if the sound sounds slightly strange, it's because of technology. But I'm very excited because we also have Soleh with us this morning, top of the hour, as they say on the news. So welcome.
Hello. Hello, Soleh.
Our guest this week is awesome.
She is really awesome.
I mean, the guests, I have to say, I'm like, all of them are just, it's been such a privilege to be able to reach out to people and have the guests that we've had. But this week, Stefanie Fox, and thank you, Kavita, because you know her, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
No, it was so great because I serve on the board of Visualizing Palestine, which is an organization that has been using infographics and storytelling to be able to translate some of the horrors that, we've been aware of for so long. But it's so rare to have a strong Jewish voice being able to stand in support and allyship with this work. And she's just been quite amazing. And you remember, Sanam, that I was so involved with the volunteering for Zohran Mamdani, the new mayor of New York. And Jewish Voice for Peace played a really critical role in that. So it was great that she was willing to come on our show.
I think that they've been really important in this kind of cultural shift and narrative shift away from kind of separating the ideas of anti-Semitism and anti-Israel sentiment kind of being the same, or anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism being equated. And they kind of flipped the identity politics thing on its head and actually use their identities to advocate for something that other people might get much more backlash for because they, would get accused of anti-Semitism, basically, for whatever they would say against Israel, or even just in support of Palestinians. And also kind of reclaiming because there is a lot of anti-Semitism when it comes to anti-Israel, like Tucker Carlson or people like him are, such an obvious example, and kind of reclaiming that and not letting it be used for anti-Semitic sentiments is also really important, and something I think that they have been driving.
We spoke with her before the war started, but they have recently issued a new statement, and just to paraphrase what they've said, Jewish Voice for Peace denounces the immoral and illegal war on Iran launched by the United States and Israel. These attacks expand the endless wars that could destroy the lives of tens of millions of people. We stand in solidarity with the people of Iran and against the US and Israeli government's imperial warmongering. And then they continue to acknowledge the protests, the protests that happened back in January, saying the diverse peoples of Iran have risen up in courage against their government's brutal oppression for decades, including massive protests over the past 2 months against crushing economic hardship and for the future of freedom and democracy. For this, there's been horrific repression at home. But let's be clear, the history of imperialist regime change, warmongering and violence and crippling sanctions on Iran and the rest of the region has reinforced the oppression of the Iranian regime. This is so true. The question of the irony, I think, of saying that the Iranian regime killed protesters, that had been out on the streets who in the name of freedom. And now we have bombs dropping on people. And the excuse being sort of bandied around is that, oh, this is to liberate them. This is to free them. And yet 3 weeks into the war, we've had over 20 hospitals destroyed, schools destroyed, oil depots, petrochemical plants. I mean, this is de facto chemical warfare. And then, of course, the gas fields, the Israelis hit, and then the Iranians have been retaliating against. So the escalation has been extraordinary. And this is something that I've been really worried about from the beginning, because the logic of this war is for all sides to escalate. And there are no guardrails. And the other day, a missile or a projectile nearly hit the Bushehr nuclear plant. And if there was radioactive spillage, it would affect the entire region, actually. So, we're all sitting here warning and kind of, screaming into the wind. And there doesn't seem to be anyone really in charge. Nobody's really seems to be taking any action. I'm like, where are the Chinese? Where are the Turks? I don't know who's listening. Who does Mr. Trump listen to? And then, of course, there's this dark humor in all of this. I don't know, Sus, whether you've been following the question of whether Netanyahu's alive and all the AI memes.
I knew you were going to bring this up.
I've been obsessed with it. I've been absolutely obsessed.
When we were sent the outline about, let's talk about the state of the war and whatever, I was like, 100% she's going to bring up the AI Netanyahu finger nonsense.
Well, it's the finger, it's the ear, it's the cuff. The latest he did. No,
I'm not following the AI.
Okay.
Like, well, what do you think of this whole narrative that people are saying that Iran is winning, whatever that means?
This is what we call asymmetric warfare, which means that you got two nuclear powers, two powerful entities fighting a much weaker entity. And when you have this kind of a dynamic, for the weaker one to survive, they've won. That's basically, so anytime, this is always, when Israel would bomb Hezbollah, right? The fact that Israel as a state is going after a non-state actor, if Hezbollah survived, effectively they'd won. So this is the same narrative here, that if Iran survives, it's winning. That's why the logic of escalation is in play, because the Iranians are trying to escalate the pain of this war, the economic pain of it, to get the world to sort of stop, or to get the Americans and the Israelis to stop. The Israelis are trying to escalate to do as much damage because they want to really decimate the state, and even if the regime survives, they want it to be completely crippled. But they're going after public infrastructure, civilian infrastructure, and it's really about destroying the nation, I think. And then the Americans are stuck in the situation of being the world military power, and yet being hit by this tiny, militarily Iran is minuscule in terms of its budget and so forth. So they're trying to escalate because they can't be perceived to be losing. But today's news is that Iran hit these F-35 planes, which are. They cost, I don't know how much.
Yeah, Hassan Piker had that on live stream.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's everyone's like, it's like the underdog and everyone's getting excited about it. But the truth is that militarily, if this continues, there's no way that Iran can win. Yeah. I mean, it depends on how much damage they're willing to do. And what really, really upsets me is that we have a regime that is willing to sacrifice the nation for its own survival. And then we have an opposition that has tied itself to Israel and the United States, and it is also willing to sacrifice the nation in the name of getting rid of the regime. So it's two extremes, and it's like hate and
the
rage.
Opposition meaning like monarchists,
the monarchists.
People.
I mean, it's the monarchists. It's the MEK, the Mujahideen. They call themselves different National Resistance Council and things. But it's these, but the monarchists in particular, because Reza Pahlavi, the Shah's son, has been operating a kind of a strategy which is very MAGA, very far right. Like it's very much like you're either with us or against us, align with me and shut up, that kind of thing. But they have been the cheerleaders. He was like the Pied Piper of this war. One of the things that really I find disturbing is that it was almost as if the 12-day war in June was like a prologue to this, to lull people into a sense of confidence that, war isn't going to be so bad. It's going to be targeted. It's going to be limited. They're going to come and get the big guys, and then we'll be fine. And it was like bait and switch. And curious, Kavita, from where you're sitting, how the effects of this war are playing out as well. I think it's really important to know that it's not just contained in Iran, obviously.
Well, I'm in a village in India, and I've just been grumbling to Soleh, saying that I've been looking forward to having my favorite snacks, and every single little provider of jalebi and samosas and vada pav has been pushed out of business because there isn't any cooking gas to be had for love or money. And the reason there isn't any cooking gas has a lot to do with the fact that this illegal and completely irresponsible war that the United States and Iran are waging have essentially put India into a sort of a death spiral because we are so dependent on imported gas and oil. So I know that sounds very trivial, Sanam, compared to other things, but I think it gives us a sense of how awful and how widespread the implications of this are all around the world.
I also heard that in Sri Lanka, they now have Wednesday off. Like people don't go to school, people don't go to work, just, to basically, to ration.
And I was talking
supply.
to my family in Karachi. My husband's family is all in Karachi in Pakistan. And there, of course, they've got an ongoing war with Afghanistan, but they also depend on oil from Iran and gas. And they haven't had piped gas, which we used to always think was so fancy in Pakistan because they got piped gas. And things are really tough.
It does make you wonder how little we know about supply chains and where they come from and these waterways and what's going on. I was like,
I have to say, I feel like everybody, including me, of like my generation hearing about this is suddenly looking at a map and going, oh, I didn't know Iran had that little bit on the other side too.
It's funny because I think your point about geography, Soleh, is so interesting. I remember my first international relations class, and it was actually with Iqbal Ahmed, the Pakistani intellectual and scholar. And we were all shocked because we came to class and, it was the US and I was in my junior year and I thought I was so smart. And all he had was a blank map of the world. And he said, we are not discussing anything about international politics until you fill out this map and you put in where the waterways are, where the mountains are, and it's been so, that just makes me think of what you just said because...
Yeah, we had the same in my modern Middle Eastern history class at MIT, and our professor made us, the first exam was fill in a map of the Middle East with the countries and the rivers.
I had a slightly different version of this in the second grade at our Tehran Community School, which was the best school in the world. We were doing, geography and world maps and things. And I missed the class. I was sick the day that they did the continents and the waterways and things like that. So I show up a couple of days afterwards and there was a geography test, pop quiz. And they put the world map. And I just remember sitting there age 7 or 8, looking at this thing and just assuming that all the big bits were land and all the smaller bits were the water bits, right? So I kind of color it in very, very happily, green and brown with all the oceans and the land masses all blue, and I got a 0. So ever since then I've been quite conscious about my geography. Yeah, but the Straits of Hormuz, and also I remember when I was about 9 or 10, we went to Bandar Abbas as a family trip. And we went on these amazing, beautiful double-decker wooden boats, double-decker. And they were really narrow, but incredibly steady. I don't know how they operated, basically, how they balanced. And as kids, we were just sort of watching what's going on and sort of understanding, okay, this is also our country. And it was tropical. I mean, the weather
Sanam,
was
do you
tropical.
know that even now in India, the word in Hindi and in Urdu for harbor is bandargah. It comes from Farsi into Hindi and into Urdu. It's so interesting.
Well, and on that slightly happier note, I wanted to wish everybody happy Nowruz. We are starting a new year, and
is it 1404?
It is 14. It's always 21. So what are we? 2026.
1405?
1405, yeah. 1405.
It's a big celebration in Mumbai as well because we have the big Iranian community, the Zoroastrian community. So Nowruz is a big deal here.
Do they do the fire jumping there?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
We've been doing it like guerrilla fire jumping. We take little candles out into the side streets and have somebody sort of watching, and then my mom comes out and we sort of jump. It was
Here we did it in Jesus Green in the park, and then a group of Iranians came up to us and were like, "Are you doing Charshanbe Suri?" And I was like, "Yeah." It was perfectly nice. They had like music and they had a bigger fire or whatever. And then suddenly a flag comes out and they start going, "Larijani mord, berakhsim, bacha." I was like, okay. The flag was the Pahlavi, like,
Well,
Sanam.
it's not the Pahlavi.
It's not a Pahlavi flag, but it's been co-opted by them. And then
It's a monarchy flag.
Yeah, what they said about Larijani was like, oh, he's dead.
It's good that he's dead.
Like, let's
celebrate.
Like, let's dance, guys. Yeah. Was I a huge fan? No. Is it a red flag that we're celebrating that
anybody has died?
Been killed?
Anybody's dead. Yeah. Also, I mean, it's, he was killed. So he was the national security advisor, and he was one of the most prominent figures in the regime. And he was killed at his daughter's house. And in trying to get him, they actually killed about 100 other civilians and destroyed a whole other, like a whole entire compound of homes and things of other people. So every time when you hear these things, you have to think about, as the Americans say, collateral damage, but it's other human beings and other lives that are being lost. It's a very poignant moment for all of us. I did an event the other night, which was quite interesting and fun, on poetry and propaganda. And I think we've got a new project coming along, because it was so lovely to be able to talk about current events and then anchor it in, what the poets, the Persian poets, Irish poets, Shakespeare, what's been said before, and the audience really liked it, and it just kind of made our world of geopolitics and international relations just a bit more human and kind of soul food. So I think that we might be doing a little bit more of that, but yeah.
God knows, poetry is the only thing getting me through the day these days.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Stefanie Fox from Jewish Voices for Peace.
All right. Hi and welcome.
Welcome, Stefanie. It's lovely to have you with us.
What an honor. Thank you so much for inviting me.
First of all, I have to say that I have been fangirling about JVP for a long time. I was so in awe and kind of relieved to see the protest in the Rotunda when the Israeli attacks happened on Gaza, and subsequent times and when you guys have led the protests and so forth. Can you sort of walk us through what it's been like for you as JVP? What is it that JVP does? Who are you? Who are your members? The nature of your work and your values?
Absolutely. Yes. So I have the honor of being the executive director of Jewish Voice for Peace, which is the world's largest progressive Jewish organization in support of Palestinian rights and freedom, the largest Jewish anti-Zionist organization in the world. And we have hundreds of thousands of Jews who are working for a vision of freedom, justice, and equality for all people, no exceptions, and for a free Palestine, as part of that. And we work in the U.S. We have over 100 chapters and local groups all throughout the country. We have a rabbinic council. We have students on dozens and dozens of campuses. And all of that grassroots power is really devoted to the kind of change that we think will sustain and create that better world. Primarily at this point, through shifting the role that the U.S. plays in upholding and sustaining Israeli oppression, apartheid, and genocide of Palestinians. And so we've been around as a grassroots organization for nearly 30 years, working community by community to change things in the way that I think change always happens, which is delivered by everyday people coming together and fighting for what's right. I would say that over, the past 830 days that it has been of the genocide in this form, the core of our organization has stayed very much the same as being a group of U.S. Jews fighting for freedom in this way. But our specific mandate within the broader Palestinian liberation movement has just become clarified and honed. These hundreds of thousands of Jews, as you were talking about, in that particular protest and in, hundreds and hundreds of protests since, just Jews simply making the very simple and clear and important message, like, not in our names. Like, we refuse to allow Jews to be a moral cover for genocide and apartheid and for the US's own financial and imperial interests that drive our support of Israel. You know, we refuse to have Jews be used in that way, and we will do everything we can, not only refuse that, but to actually deliver the material change needed to see a very different world. So it has been a time of amplification of what we've been doing all along, but a much bigger form of it. And we're probably, by every measure, 3 times the size organization we were 3 years ago. And I think that reflects the meteoric growth of the Palestinian freedom movement overall. And I think that's the kind of contradiction we're all facing, right? That we are seeing more grassroots power in this movement than it's ever been, mobilizing with like more force and more sophistication than has ever happened before. And yet we're, of course, horrifyingly aware that we have not stopped the genocide, you know, a ceasefire in name only, and that it is the moment for us to continue to escalate and grow our work so that all of that power actually ends this sort of U.S.-Israel genocidal war machine that continues unabated in spite of all of that growth.
Thank you for that, Stefanie. You began by saying you're the world's largest anti-Zionist Jewish community-based organization. And that word has now begun to be thrown around with such alarming misconceptions. And I think it would be great for our listeners and for us really to understand how you understand Zionism and why, as a Jewish peace group, you think this is so important for us to be able to have a clear understanding. Because I think many communities, both in the European context, in the UK, where Sanam is based right now, and here in New York City, where I live, are being told that to be anti-Zionist is tantamount to being anti-Semitic. And it would be great to hear your perspective on this and how you do your work in educating and changing perspectives on this very critical issue.
Absolutely. You know, Zionism is what it does, right? And it's the political ideology that led to the expulsion of more than 750,000 Palestinians from their land and homes in order to create a discriminatory ethno-state with exclusive rights for Jews over those indigenous Palestinians on their own land. That is what Zionism always was and has continued to be in the carrying out of the unchanged policies of the Israeli government, which we now see in their most grotesque and mask-off form through the continued genocide. But it is this ideology, and as a Jewish group, why then be anti-Zionist? Of course, all folks, anybody who cares about ending systems that create such catastrophic harm should be anti-Zionist. But for Jews, there's a very personal stake, because Zionism suggests that Jews require that supremacist nation state to answer the very real question, historically and today, of Jewish safety. And as a Jewish organization, we believe that everywhere in the world, Jews belong and should be safe. And of course, though, that real safety will never grow from guns and checkpoints and walls and a police state, and that true safety will be built through forging real solidarity and fighting for a world where all are living in dignity and safety and freedom. And so anti-Zionism is the obvious choice for anybody and for all of us who support liberation and justice for the Palestinian people, including their right to return to their homes and land, and a future for all people on that land and all land, where freedom and safety and equality are the baseline.
It's amazing how over the last 20 years of having lived in America, self-censorship becomes so embedded in our kind of in our own mind and in our own hearts. So this conversation, on the one hand, I'm like, oh my God, we're actually having the conversation. But the minute this issue of anti-Semitism and Zionism comes up, the question of Israel as a state comes up. And I'm curious about what you think. But my explanation when I talk to people is that we criticize the Iranian regime. That doesn't mean I'm criticizing the entity of Iran, or certainly not Islam or whatever other cultural things that mean. We mean like the Trump MAGA thing, but doesn't mean you're against the United States or the people. So do you see that same kind of analogy in terms of Judaism, Israel, Zionism, or what happens to the state of Israel? So if we were in charge, what would be your vision of what happens to Israel, the state, the people, the rights, and so forth, and security that both sides obviously need?
Yeah, it's interesting, though. The conversation often turns to the question of the right of states. Where are we in the world today that we are talking about the right that rogue genocidal ethnostates have in some sort of intrinsic rights rather than the rights of human beings literally surviving, if they can, a live stream genocide for more than 2 years? The red herring of it all is so obvious on its face, but we get trapped in these cycles of conversation. And it's like the simple idea that we want a society rooted in both like just the basics of international law and human rights norms, which have been so massively eroded in the last 3 years, let alone many decades. But we're living in the consequences of having decimated those norms, right? But so a society rooted in what we say would be, democracy. What would it look like to imagine a society rooted in democracy and equality rather than dispossession and domination? If you talk about, for instance, South Africa ending the system and regime of apartheid, what was possible in a society rooted in equality and for all under the law? We get brought into these conversations that really take us away from the very simple, very obvious realities of what is so wrong with the world today, with the state of Israel as it functions and as it always has functioned. We try to stay rooted in that and not get sort of thrown in that way.
What is it that you do? I mean, if somebody says, hey, I want to join you, what is it that you guys wake up and do on a daily basis, or in your chapters or your members?
So our chapters and members across the country work at sort of transforming things politically, financially, and culturally. So we really understand that from the U.S., that U.S.-Israel alliance upholding Israeli apartheid is held in place by those different sort of pillars of support. Our members and chapters are doing the day-to-day work of shifting and transforming the way that functions. So for instance, boycott, divestment, and sanctions campaigns allow for everyday people to withdraw the complicity of their institutions, their cities, their states in those oppressive systems upholding Israeli apartheid, or in the corporations that are war profiteers off of the genocide, right? And so our chapters in almost 20 cities and states across the country right now are working in coalition to end Israel bonds sales in cities and states where they live. Israel bonds are unrestricted loans that go directly into the Israeli treasury and fund settlement expansion, the genocide.
So my finance knowledge is absolutely rubbish.
Tell us what a bond is.
Yeah, exactly. Tell us what, and presumably bonds give interest rates to people.
Bonds are basically an unrestricted loan to the Israeli government, where the money goes directly from our pension funds, our city budgets, our state budgets, in the hundreds or tens of millions of dollars, money directly from our communities into the Israeli treasury, completely unrestricted, to commission these war crimes. And that money is invested as a loan from the U.S. side to the Israeli government. So over a quarter of that debt that Israel holds, it turns out that carrying out a genocide and constantly escalating wars of aggression throughout the region is very costly for the state of Israel. And it's underwritten by American taxpayers, obviously with the billions of dollars sent by our federal government, but it's also underwritten by other billions of dollars sent from our cities, states, and institutions.
By the rest of us.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so everyday people are doing a beautiful job of saying, absolutely not. Like, do not invest our money in this. And it turns out also that it tends to be a bad investment, honestly.
So I was going to say.
It's a bad investment. So it also betrays the fiduciary responsibility that these treasurers and others are holding in making these choices.
So, Stefanie, that's why we see, for example, I've seen city council meetings where young members of any age, actually, you're right, it's very intergenerational. Yeah. Members of JVP are attending a city council meeting, and then they stand up and they say, we don't support this proposed city council decision or resolution because we feel it's a poor use of our tax dollars. And those are local tax dollars in that case.
Yes, exactly. So like in the city of New York, as we're talking about, the former comptroller of New York, Brad Lander, who was in office before this term,
Yay, Brad.
agreed to divest from Israel bonds in the city accounts, right? Sell off those bonds. And Mark Levine is the new comptroller, and there is a very active campaign to insist that that become ongoing policy, right? So it's a decision made at that local level. They're also in state pension funds. They're also unions will have them in the pension funds, things like that.
And is there any other country other than Israel? Like, could there be an Iran bond or an India bond?
Oh, I'm sure there's an Iran bond.
I'm
like
just
a North
pointing
Korea
out.
bond.
I'm just pointing out how rare it is for any.
Yeah.
There's not a France bond either, or a UK bond.
Right. There are a few other sovereign bonds, but far and away the Israel bonds are, because they, for historically, have been used as a political statement. And you actually, the state of Israel is very direct in saying it's a way of BDS proofing the economy, meaning that for other campaigns, which our people are also involved in, of saying, like, for instance, corporations that are also making money hand over fist because of the genocide, and we should not be invested in war profiteers, full stop, period, anywhere in the world, including in Israel. Companies that like make their money off of occupation, surveillance, etc. And so in BDS campaigns, pulling money out of those corporations or pushing those corporations to pull out of Israel, that has an impact on the Israeli economy. And these Israel bonds basically underwrite that, ensure that the economy can continue to forward this unending war. It's a war economy that needs constantly fueled and funded. Historically, our mayors and governors have been able to just be like, we're proudly sending $200 million to support Israel, like basically doing it as like a contribution to the genocidal war effort. But because there's been such a sea change in what the common sense is across American cities and towns and states, there is an opportunity to translate that understanding of what's right into the policy of where our money is going as taxpayers. And so more and more people are doing that, not just raising our voices in sort of broad protest, but really making it targeted so that we can withdraw our complicity. Like it's not even at this point an act of solidarity. It's an act of saying, I don't want to be literally complicit with my money in these war crimes.
Stefanie, on this financial stuff, if you read the statutes of the Nuremberg tribunals, right, people can be brought forward to the court. One of the things is if you aid and abet war crimes and genocide. And aid and abet is a very broad term.
Yes.
But I think about it in terms of, well, if my taxes are going towards weapons and support, then I am being de facto forced into aiding and abetting and becoming a war criminal.
That's correct.
Can we not collectively join up and say, I don't want to pay my taxes because I don't want to be a war criminal?
Well, you know, the point you're making of like being forced to be complicit in genocide and ongoing apartheid is, you know, it's what in many ways gets me up every morning to say, like, I refuse. You know, when I say, like, this is a huge movement of Jews just simply saying I refuse, it's a huge movement of all people, right? Saying I refuse to be complicit in this. It's obscene. And I think that there's lots of ways to translate that into collective action that can actually end that complicity, right? And so your suggestion of like tax resisting is, you know, the anti-war movement has a proud history of that as a tactic. The call for international solidarity in the form of boycott, divestment, and sanctions from Palestinian civil society, which originated in 2005, is, you know, in so many ways our best bet of translating that feeling you're talking about, Sanam, of like, how dare those in power put me and my own money even into complicity with the crimes against humanity. Boycott and divestment allows for us to turn that individual feeling into a form of collective action that could actually shift the bottom line for those war profiteering corporations, pull the money of those investments out of where they currently are supporting Israel. We should never understand the way that U.S. policy, or UK policy for that matter, is sort of immutable. That like, okay, this is where our tax dollars go and that's where it will always go. They would like us to think that. They would like us to feel
They'd like us not to even know, right? Like they'd
right,
rather we
to
just
not even know.
pay up and shut up. Yeah, it's sort of
Exactly. And
Yeah.
so I think that there's, what is our responsibility, not just to be like, it's a bummer that billions of dollars of ours are going to to a genocide right this second as we walk and breathe, but actually to say we can organize in all of these ways and insist upon a change in that. We actually have an obligation to do so.
Stefanie, can I ask you something personal? When you're leading movements like this, and on the one hand, we are saying that it is intergenerational, and yet, even in our own family, as I told you, I have a family of extended Jewish relatives, we can definitely see a difference amongst people who feel just very strongly that being aligned with the state of Israel is part of their core identity. And you said earlier that you work on the cultural level, on the policy level,
And the financial.
and
like
the
we're talking
financial
about.
level, right? And what
Yeah.
we're talking about. I'm just curious, how do you do this at a personal, cultural level in which you're shifting perceptions that have been long held and that are almost sacrosanct? As Sanam said, you couldn't even raise this issue, much less have an open discussion like this. And what are your strategies that you feel have worked?
Great question. Well, I think on a few different levels we work culturally, right? There's the fact is that what you're describing of sort of this period of time in which Jewish identity, what the state of Israel and worked very hard to fuse Jewish identity with Zionism, with unconditional support for its policies.
Right.
And it's very important when you're doing culture shift work to have the longer arc of history and memory at hand. As long as there has been Zionism, which it's a 19th century movement that drew its vision and ideology from other colonial movement and nation state ideology at the time. You're just bread and butter. It's not unique. It's not exceptional. But, as long as there has been a Zionist movement, there have been anti-Zionist Jews.
That's true.
And in fact, it's only since really 1967 that a sort of consolidation of American Jewish identity around a Zionist politics was even common or the norm, So I think it's it's in living memory that this became the supposed always core Jewish identity. It's very, very short. In the millennia of Jewish history, it's the tiniest blip, quite honestly. And so
That's a great way to remind us of just the time frame on that, I think. Yeah.
because we're in this urgency all the time, and the compression of the sort of culture of silencing and that you're talking about can make it feel the walls close in, and you feel very focused on those four walls around you. But you have to, in doing this work, see the longer arc and understand and really draw strength from those sort of movement ancestors and even elders in the community still today who say no, Shatsi called her the people's babia, this amazing elder that may her memory continue to be for a blessing, who passed away a couple of years ago. Shatsi Weisberger would say, I'm older than the state of Israel. I can tell you for a fact that this is not core to Jewish identity. But I will say, to your real question though, because for many people, in spite of that history, memory can be short. And there are an enormous set of very intentional ways that Zionist culture building inside of American Jewish life over the last half a century has fused those identities and made it feel to Jewish Americans like the answer to questions of Jewish safety and Judaism itself required this ethno-state. So what we do is a kind of manyfold, but on one hand, we have, rabbis and spiritual leaders in independent Havarot and synagogues, etc., all over the country who are building a Judaism beyond Zionism, who are really reclaiming and extending those histories that I'm talking about in ways because as a Jewish people, there's a desperation to honestly secure and save our beautiful tradition from its being weaponized and brutalized and desiccated in this way. And so there's religious work in that way. There's liturgical work and community work, having space to come together. There's also work that is about unlearning and letting go of the kind of racist conditioning that many of us were raised with. And so we have things like a storytelling project called Wrestling with Zionism, where people come together and just honestly work through their own histories of understanding how and why they were raised to dehumanize Palestinians and to do the internal work of letting go of that. So it operates on a lot of different levels.
Yeah. Stefanie, it's I'm sitting here listening, and in so many ways it's so personal, because I grew up in Iran, and we had, and there is still, a very vibrant Jewish community. There's still synagogues and so forth. And even with the Islamist revolution that we all had to endure, actually they didn't target the Jewish community. They did not target the Christian community. They targeted people that they were against politically. So, we were Shias, and they targeted my family. And then the group that they targeted as a religious minority were the Baha'is, because they come after Shiism. So there was kind of from in their theocracy, they don't accept Baha'is. But the Jewish population has lived there, and they feel very Iranian. And it was only during the Iran-Iraq war, when everyone was trying to get their sons out of Iran because they didn't want their boys being carted off to war, that we saw a sort of a shift of migration of Iranian Jews going into Israel. And I remember meeting some in Tel Aviv in the late 90s. At the time, they still felt very Iranian.
Yes.
And in my universe and in the Iranian cultural history, we didn't understand anti-Semitism. And it's not an issue for us. It's not our issue. And yet, when I moved to the United States, anything that I said, anytime I said, the state of Israel is doing, everybody just assumed that I was anti-Semitic. I'd have an allergic reaction to it, because I'm like, this isn't my issue, but it's being pushed on us. And now 30 years later, that's become normalized, as if you're a Muslim or if you're Middle Eastern or then you are anti-Semitic. And we're like, but this isn't our history.
Yes.
And how we've ended up vilifying a whole other part of the world. I'm just curious about kind of where did that narrative fit in, or what the challenges are that you deal with?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, part of what you're talking about is also like the just reality of diasporic Jewish identities all throughout the world. And when we say, what is an anti-Zionist Jewish politic, it's a diasporic one that really claims and honors our many, many varied Jewish histories. There's not one Jewish history. And we have incredible leaders in JVP, in our Black and Indigenous and Jews of color, Sephardi Mizrahi network, that do the work of intellectual thought leadership that you're talking about, Sanam, of making sure that we talk about like the way that Zionism works to flatten all of Jewish history, and also insist on Jews of the Arab world to be able to return to their homes that have been forced expulsion because of the impacts of the Zionist movement, right? And to ensure that those paths home for Jewish people are not through the state of Israel and through the oppression of Palestinians, denying other people access to their ancestral homeland.
Because actually, the kind of, if you take it full circle, anti-Semitism and Zionism, there have always been kind of cousins of each other, right? You could argue that, if you're going to have an exclusionary, Jewish state, then all countries can say, okay, all the Jews should go to Israel. I mean, that's the danger, right? That
right.
It creates this kind of extremist weaponizing identity.
In fact, the only person in the Balfour Declaration who opposed it amongst British politicians was the only Jewish British politician, Montagu, who said exactly what you just said, Sanam. He said, I refuse to accept this Balfour Declaration because it's basically a cover for anti-Semitism in the UK.
Right. Well, Zionism, as you're saying, Zionism and modern anti-Semitism emerge both from this world of Western nation-state building concepts that really defined the other as the most essential way of building a nation-state is to have the other that you oppress and push out and dominate. The reclamation necessary inside of Jewish community of our histories and our futures is important here. So that beautiful multiplicity of Jewish life and where we like belong and have community is very much a threat to the Zionist and Israeli narrative. It has to be flattened into this like Jews were always oppressed. Somehow Palestinians become the proxy for the crimes of the West and,
Everything,
and for literal Nazis. And that's projected in order to carry out ongoing dispossession, ethnic cleansing, just genocide.
I've got so many questions for you. Number one, from what you're saying, you would be in direct opposition groups like AIPAC.
Yes.
And AIPAC Light, which we're now seeing in the UK and elsewhere. I mean, the way in which these movements have spread.
Sure.
Do you get scared? Do you get threatened? Do you worry about your own safety and security? Tell us what that side of life is like to be a peace activist in this universe.
You know, there are a lot of threats against foremost Palestinians and Palestinian organizing, and then anybody who is willing to stand alongside Palestinians fighting for freedom. And that's always been true. It's a very violently repressed movement all throughout the world, foremost inside Israel, but also here in the United States, always has been. With the current fascist dissent of our own U.S. government as well. Like, you know, Project 2025, authored by the Heritage Foundation, there's an addendum called Project Esther, which is a manual for how to take apart the Palestine movement in order to kind of sharpen the tools. JVP is listed as one of like 3 or 4 organizations. And I think people should know it's true that being in this movement isn't without risk. You know, like we have like 5 active lawsuits against us right now, you know, which these Trump-aligned law firms just throwing spaghetti at the wall, trying to slow down our work. And there are constant threats. To be honest, it is scary to have, you know, the White House say we're on a list with 8 organizations, you know, these for criminalization. But I think that what I was trying to get at, it's not to be falsely humble. It's to say that it's a terrifying political conditions that have been allowed to be set as somehow normal that we live in. And so when I feel some of that fear about what is the part of it that's facing JVP or me individually or my family, whatever, it's that long view again. It's to say, I feel fear. Okay, that's part of my experience right now. And I feel enormous gratitude to get to be in this life doing this work. And to be doing anything else would be much more scary. To be accepting these violent conditions and thinking there was no better life would be terrifying at a really different level.
Yeah, thank you. So we have a bunch of questions that we always ask our guests. Do you want to go, Kavita, with the first one?
Oh, sure. So you've kind of already alluded to this, but we're going to ask you anyway. What's a radical idea or an allegedly radical idea that you think should be normal or that you don't think is radical at all?
Oh, so many. That every human life is equally valuable, full stop. You know, really shouldn't be a radical idea, really not present in our politics.
I mean, I feel like that's the Miss Rachel story, right? Sanam, Miss Rachel is this wonderful, you know who she is. She's the influencer woman who's been supporting kids. And yeah, exactly. Radical idea. Okay, Sanam, you go next.
Question number 2. If you were in charge right now, determining U.S. policy positionality vis-a-vis Israel-Palestine, what are the 3 things that you would do and insist upon?
Well, I would put people thriving, living in dignity with freedom and equality in the center of the policy making. And everything would then flow very easily from that. That would mean full divestment and end of U.S. funding of Israel. It would mean divestment from the systems of harm driven by corporate profit in our politics, war and militarism, prisons, deportations, you know. And then it would mean investing in the life-sustaining programs and vision that we all need to thrive from the, you know, all around the world and here at home.
Pretty clear.
So on the question of divestment from Israel and militarily and so forth, if the U.S. isn't party to that conflict, what will it look like tomorrow?
Yeah, we always say that, like, the U.S. likes to pose, like, it's quite a costume to imagine they can pose as this anymore, but likes to pose as sort of an honest broker, quote unquote, right? When in fact it's a full partner in Israel's crimes. And so if the U.S. were not by billions of dollars funding, fueling, diplomatically defending at all costs Israel's crimes against humanity and ongoing apartheid and genocide, well, then the possibility of actual diplomatic negotiations that the people on the ground living there actually ultimately have to decide their futures rooted in, which we carry forward, the values of like international law that must be fulfilled, then I think that's actually possible. But it's literally not possible while the system of oppression is being driven and underwritten and armed by the U.S. government. So it's withdrawing that role.
So I'm going to skip the question about the money because I think you've explained to us very well. But I'm going to...
Although the money question, just for you to know, is if you had $1 billion, or if you were a billionaire, what would you do? So you're welcome to answer.
You're welcome to answer it, but I just
also
wanted to give you space to answer the what gives you hope. So you can choose, or you can do both.
Okay, I can choose. I mean, if I was a billionaire, I would say there should be no billionaires. I would say, let me give my money back to the people and places I extracted it from, because I would have done so to get that $1 billion. What gives me hope, I think, is, it's organizing. People saying, these systems of domination and oppression are not inevitable. Mm-hmm. And if we come together, we can build something really different. And we can root that vision in hope and an idea that we could all thrive next to one another. And actually, it happens. If you get enough people together and you believe enough in what you're building together, like enormously impossible feeling things are simply made possible. And so I'm so grateful to get to be in a movement of people who can feel despairing, but refuse those politics of despair through organizing.
I do want to say that I think just statistically, Stefanie, you have had a lot of wins.
Yeah. I mean,
I think sometimes when we do this, we say, well, what gives you hope? And you think that it's kind of some abstract thing, but you could list off what you folks have done. And I'm just wondering if you want to say a couple before you end, because I think it's important for people to leave with a sense of the tangibility of hope.
Yeah. Yeah.
As I said, for me, JVP has been such a standard bearer for an entity that gives the rest of us courage and cover, frankly, because it's very easy to get smeared with anti-Semitism if you're not Jewish and you criticize Israel. But I also see the movements here in Europe. And I was going to ask you, to what extent has JVP expanded its reach, or are there some sort of coalition building and so forth? Do you take some pride in the fact that maybe you've also inspired some of that work that's going on?
The way organizing works, it's all in relationship. And so it's a loop of hope we give each other. Being in relationship with those sort of emerging anti-Zionist Jewish organizations all over the world is really so beautiful to us because, we're an internationalist organization, and it's easy in the U.S. to pretend the U.S. really wants to be the center of the world and pretend no one else exists. And also it's very, as an organization, it's actually core to our values that we see organizing all over the world and understand its relationship to us and ours. And so yes, in short answer, we're very happy to already have a lot of those connections and are committed to growing them and being of support where we can to say, here's how we did it here in our context in the U.S., what might work to grow anti-Zionist Jewish organizing in your own context, in your own countries. And to the question of grounded sort of material reasons for hope, I would say, we talked a lot about Israel bonds, and just in the last month, campaigns in 4 different cities and states have run, thank you, have divested almost $30 million from those bonds in just the last month. There's and it's very hard to get the newspapers to report it, but it's really happening city by city, state by state. Locally, those things are underway. And also, the election of Mamdani shows us what can happen in the electoral arena when our movements translate their power into those kinds of wins for governing power as well. So we have many reasons to hope in spite of the very, very horrific news that comes in daily.
You mentioned the media. How do you navigate, and what would you do if you were in charge at the BBC or in CBS these days, or what would be your policy if you were in charge there?
I would have a lot to say. I do have a lot to say. What I mean, to start, we've been talking. You mentioned earlier, Sanam, the literal legal structure that says if you're that dictates like who couldn't be held accountable for manufacturing consent for genocide. And I think that the mainstream media in the US has a grave responsibility in manufacturing consent and allowing for what everybody with their bare eyes could tell was happening from the very beginning. Right now we're working with a coalition to demand the New York Times retract this completely debunked propaganda piece called Screams Without Wars that came out in December of 2023 that really set the foundation, was cited in U.S. congressional testimony and
by President Biden,
used as sort of...
Could you just explain, just because people may not remember what that was? Yeah.
Yes. So this particular piece makes the case and the claim and says that it's presenting evidence to establish the idea that there was a coordinated, focused, intentional campaign of mass sexual violence perpetrated against Israeli women on October 7th. And that evidence simply was not presented and does not exist in that article. And it's been debunked by other reporting, by sources named in it, by the families of of those who were killed on the day and are alleged as victims in the article, by, 60 journalism professors. It's just purely a propaganda piece. The writers, the co-authors of it, one of whom tweets saying that Gaza should be a slaughterhouse and all should be killed, and was not even a journalist prior to working on this piece, and her nephew, a food blogger, just very obviously been fully debunked in all ways. And the Times, the supposed paper of record, refuses to retract it. And it continues to set a precedent for the way that supposed reporting and journalism can justify some of the most horrific crimes against humanity that have in our lifetimes. And as a Jewish person whose family has endured anti-Semitic persecution through the centuries, it's very familiar to see the way propaganda is used to justify and set the scene for genocide, frankly. It is not an understatement to talk about the role of mainstream reporting and corporate media in actually a set of responsibilities for this ongoing genocide. And then contrasted with that, and if precisely because of that, you see the way that the Israeli government and military has targeted the unbelievably brave Palestinian journalists on the ground, more of whom have been assassinated than in any war in, I think maybe ever, certainly in the last 50 years, who have been targeted.
And their families, like literally in their homes,
And their families because of their telling of the truth. I mean,
the irony of having Western journalists play into the propaganda or the silencing of the genocide when their own colleagues, themselves. I mean, it's you're looking in the mirror and it's your own colleagues who are paying the price. I mean, others are paying the price as well, but you have affinity with your own professional.
That you would think. It's also another thing that people who are outraged and feeling this, how dare they use passive voice? It'll be like Gaza Health Ministry alleges child killed by bullet. The way that they will actually twist language to refuse to name the actors and the system of what's actually happening.
And I think in a way, having had Gaza and Ukraine play out simultaneously, side by side, was also so painful to watch because, 3 children would die in the Ukraine and you would hear Russia targeted, strike, massacres 3 children. And then you would hear Gaza Health Ministry claims 200 children died, 15,000 children died, and it was just...
Exactly.
That was really hard.
Just the inherent, the weight of that sort of incredibly racist dehumanization of Palestinians that is just like taken as a as a ground floor for the discourse. It's also, we can hold our media makers and corporate media accountable, whether it's writing letters to the editor or it's...
Okay, so we put you in charge of policy, we put you in charge of media.
I just want to say a huge thanks, Stefanie. We've been so lucky to have you with us, and you have left us with some very... That's what I love, is when people say, well, hope is this kind of like ephemeral thing. And I'm like, no, hope is really tangible.
It's very tangible.
Hope is hope is great, but it's the strategy that really matters.
Yeah.
So that you guys have hope and strategy, and you have fabulous people, and it's really a joy to talk to you. Thank you, Stefanie, for joining us.
Such a joy.
I hope to see you in person.
Yeah, I would love to. I'll come back anytime. This was really a treat. Thank you so much.
This was If You Were in Charge, a podcast brought to you by ICAN, the International Civil Society Action Network. Get in touch and tell us what you think at info@icanpeacework.org and follow our newsletter. Like and subscribe, and please tell everybody else who might like the show. My thanks to ADA Productions for making the show possible, to Little Monster Media for our music, and of course to my amazing co-host, Kavita Nandini Ramdas. And finally, to all of you for listening. We'll be back soon. Thank you.
When Mother's Day means celebrating your mom, your wife, maybe even your daughter as a new mom, trust 1-800-Flowers to help you celebrate every important woman in your life. With double blooms from 1-800-Flowers, order 1 dozen roses and get another dozen for free. It's a simple way to give beautifully, with colorful blooms that make Mother's Day feel meaningful. For every mom you're celebrating, order with confidence and get double blooms at 1-800-Flowers.com/Spotify. That's 1-800-Flowers.com/Spotify.